It's week 5, bye weeks are here, so nailing those start seat decisions are even more important than ever. We'll talk you through our QB rankings 1 to 28, breaking down our tiers along the way. Let's start at the top. Very lonely at the top, Tom. Josh Allen. This has been left very much for Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, but with Lamar Jackson expecting to miss this week's game, Josh Allen all alone at the top.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, if Lamar was out there, I think you have to include him in there. I know last week's game was disappointing, but I think that that'll be a bit more of a blip. And obviously, the Texans are a less impressive defense, despite being a good defense, than the Chiefs. And, Spags has had Lamar's number over the years, whereas Josh Allen, I mean, again, you get the odd unreliable game where he drops points, but this week going up against the Patriots, I don't see any reason to be worried about it. I think just the bigger question kind of comes down to whether Patrick Mahomes deserves to be in this tier, and I mean we can get into that in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna dive into the next tier where Patrick Mahomes is indeed sat there. He's also joined by Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, and Drake May. You touched on Patrick Mahomes there. He's playing phenomenal football. The rushing is what's really buoyed his fantasy production so far this year. You've got him as your QB6, Tom, this week. I've got him up at my QB4. How confident are you in the matchup and this week?
Well, the main reason why I kept him where I did was because Jacksonville's defense, and we touched on this last week, some of the stats around there, like DVOA, EPA, a lot of these efficiency metrics are really popping for the Jags defense. They're playing really well. But I think that we're starting to see the Chiefs find their identity now that Xavier Worthy's back. And that's a big part of it. It's really letting them do a lot more. But we're also seeing the Chiefs follow through on what they said this offseason. We wanted to be better with the deep ball, and they're throwing the deep ball more often. They've gone from an 8% deep throw rate in 2024 to a 12% deep throw rate. The catchable air yards are much better. The accuracy of the deep ball is much better than it was last year. And when you've got Xavier Worthy, a field stretcher, but somebody who can also work underneath, that really matters. So, yeah, I really wanted to push him up a little bit higher this week because what we've seen from Mahomes so far is points of 26, 23, 13, and 27. So if we see it from him this week against what is a sneaky good defense, then I think that he will belong back in the superstar tier.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the only other player that I kind of want to touch on here, Tom, Justin Herbert. He's been amazing the way he's been spreading the ball around, holding up the fantasy production of 3 fantasy viable wide receivers at the moment. The running game's got going, but we're now losing Joe Alt as well. So we've lost not only our starting left tackle at the beginning, but also our starting right tackle, who was covering at left tackle. Are you concerned? Last week, the offense kind of fell apart. I think, but to me, a big part of that was the New York Giants front 4. Do you think in a potentially easier matchup in terms of D-line potential, we can be at this confident in Justin Herbert to have him as our QB3 this week?
I think so, because the Commanders, they're not a bad team. They're not they're not terribly threatening on defense. You look at their pressure rate, they rank bottom 9 in total pressure rate. They don't tend to get to the quarterbacks as often. The sort of I think we're at 10 sacks through 4 games, which is definitely something that the Chargers can deal with. Now, obviously, they've got a chance to boost their numbers a little bit when you go up against a team without their top 2 tackles. But all I see is a team who are weak on defense as a whole. For the Commanders, they allow the 8th most fantasy points to the QB position, the 8th most to wide receivers, the 5th most to tight ends. We're seeing Aronda Gadsden work into this offense a little bit more, giving Justin Herbert more options. And I just think that Herbert is going to absolutely dominate this team through the air.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on, just quickly, Drake May. We've been banging the drum for as long as possible. He's playing some ridiculous football, and it's not just rushing production. He's operating from the pocket as a true pocket passer at times and still getting the fantasy production to go with.
Yeah, I mean, he averages 8 yards per attempt, which ranks 6th out of 35 quarterbacks, a 10% completion rate over expected, 81% catchable throw rate. 125 passer rating. And in his 17 career starts that he's got, there are 178 quarterbacks to start 17 games since 2000, or start their first 17 games. And of those 178, Drake May has the 7th best success rate, according to Ben Solak. Like, I just think that's every stat which I look at is really impressive. And the Bills' defense, they're up and down would be a kind way to say it. And I think that Drake May can do enough here. And with the emergence of Stephon Diggs last week, Hunter Henry becoming a really reliable red zone threat, he's got enough that he can make things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Before we move on to our B tier, though, if you are finding this for the first time, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. We're doing these ranking shows for every position, every single week, and so much more content. You will not regret it. Moving into the B tier, starts to drop a little bit away from those potential game-breaking weeks. We've got Jared Goff, Daniel Jones, Jayden Daniels, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, and Dak Prescott. Let's start with Jayden Daniels. We're expecting him to be back. He has been medically cleared by the training staff. Is it a case of wheels up, let's go? Or are you expecting a little bit less rushing production?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You go back to last year and you look at those games where he was banged up for a spell, and then he only kind of he started the season rushing plenty, and then things dipped down a little bit, and then they picked back up later on in the season. And that kind of spell where things dipped off a bit, he had points returns of like 15 points, 8 points, 11 points. Like, they weren't complete stone cold killers, and good enough that in 2 QB formats you definitely want to start him still, but not strong enough where you could look at them and go, he's a reliable fantasy asset. And I just think that against the Chargers defense, which is playing really well, I just have a little bit of a concern that maybe he's not going to be able to make as much magic happen through the air. And if he's not able to make as much magic happen through the air, you would like to normally think that he'll be able to do it on the ground. I'm not sure we're going to see that. And to add to it, I believe Deebo Samuel's banged up as well. I mean, we're taking this on Wednesday. It'll be interesting to see what the practice reports say. But if you're missing Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, I'm not overly optimistic.
You don't believe in the Luke McCaffrey breakout game continuing? No?
Well, he's been running very pure, but so far, touchdowns only, really.
Yeah, and then Jared Goff feels quite highly ranked this week at QB7. What is it that's got your excitement flowing for Jared Goff this week, Tom?
Well, I mean, it's as simple as play the Bengals. Like, if you play the Bengals, you are going to get pushed way up in the way that I rank people. And you looked at it last week, and Bo Nix has his best game of the season. The Bengals, they just can't stop anything. And my only hesitation with Jared Goff is just whether this turns into a super run-heavy game, whether we decide to run the game up through the air. Dan Campbell has a history of being quite happy to run the score up, and I think that he would definitely take pleasure in this. But is it all going to happen through the passing game? I'm comfortable with him in this B tier and where we've got him ranked at the top of this tier, but it's a little hard for me to push him higher. But one thing I would say is that as soon as this line came out at -10, it was the first bet of the week I made. I'm very comfortable saying that Cincinnati are going to be at least 2 touchdowns down.
Yeah, I think this is time for Zach Taylor to start packing up his bags and maybe getting ahead of it. I think it's a done deal there. Before we move on to our C tier, though, if you do have any start sit questions, you want to talk through a trade, or you just want to pick Tom and I brain, get them in the comments below. Tom and I will answer 100% of questions all the way up to kickoff on Sunday. This C tier, we can keep this nice and short. Obviously, we've got Brock Purdy and Matthew Stafford here. We are recording this on the Wednesday before the Thursday night game, so we will not be touching on those. But we've also got Bo Nix and Geno Smith. I want to talk about Bo Nix, Tom. I've been saying in my weekly write-ups that I just can't get my head around this. Normally, we see second year of an offense, the handcuffs start to come off and start to free up. It feels like Sean Payton is putting more handcuffs on Bo Nix. It feels like this offense is becoming more restricted, and Bo Nix is being told exactly what to do and not being given the freedom to create. Do you have any concerns about him continuing to struggle and not put up the fantasy production that we did see last year?
Yeah, because I mean, we already kind of touched on it, but the Bengals is the kind of matchup which everybody should be looking forward to for the rest of the season, particularly whilst Jake Browning's at quarterback. But is the 26.7 points that Bo Nix scored against them, is that real? Or is this a case of what we really get from him is somewhere around the 9.8 points, 21 points, 13.4 points that he put up in the other games? And you look at this game going to Philadelphia, I think that like of all the matchups you could want, this is going to tell us a bit more about where Bo Nix is because the Eagles just continue to be excellent when it comes to Vic Fangio. Like, I thought Vic Fangio was done after his time in Denver. Vic Fangio
Particularly after
didn't.
Miami as well.
Yeah, Vic Fangio didn't leave Denver on the best of terms, and then it looked even worse in Miami. But now he's got this new lease of life again with a defense that's completely bought into the way that he wants to play, and I think that there'll be a lot of pride on the line. It's just going to be very interesting to see how Sean Payton chooses to attack this game because the Eagles are really strong through the air at the minute, and the one area people have been able to score on them is with running backs and I'm not sure it's necessarily a Bo Nix game, but I couldn't really justify pushing him much further down than this at the same time.
Yeah, the one thing that I do wonder is if we see the kind of the third receiving options for Denver suddenly balling out. You know, we've seen Quinion
Yeah.
Mitchell be absolutely phenomenal, locking down corners, locking down receivers. Is he going to follow someone like Cortland Sutton? We know Cooper DeJean is one of the best nickels in the game. Is he going to lock down someone like Troy Franklin? Does that then free up Marvin Mims? Because I can't even think of his name off the top of my head. The second corner in Philadelphia has been a complete weak spot and has been picked up all season long. So because Denver has this quite flat wide receiver structure where, you know, do we know who the 2 is? Do we know who the 3 is? Can we maybe get after that third receiver, the second guy that's going to play outside opposite Cortland Sutton? And maybe we see someone like a Marvin Mims have, you know, 5 catches, 140 yards and 2 touchdowns or something like that.
Yeah, it's Avonte Maddox, isn't it? The
Yes, that's the
Eagles cornerback. Yeah, I mean, well, from a target perspective, Troy Franklin's equal with Cortland Sutton with 27 this year. I think it's very much going to be tricky for the Broncos, though, because what they want to do is they want to run screens. Bo Nix has thrown more screen passes than anybody else in the league, and Philly through 4 games have allowed -1 yards through on screen passes. So, like Marvin Mims gets used in those sometimes, then he gets used further downfield. I feel like maybe I'd rather put my chips in on Troy Franklin and that production coming there than necessarily through the design stuff. But it's really difficult one to pass.
Yeah, this comes back to what I said at the top. This offense is still very much got handcuffs firmly placed on Bo Nix's wrists, and I don't see them coming off anytime soon. Moving into the D tier, Jaxson Dart, Sam Darnold, Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young. We got to talk about Jaxson Dart. The most ridiculous performance I think I've ever seen from a guy in the first game in terms of, I don't think this was a real NFL offense. I don't think he was asked to make many progression throws, if any, but for fantasy purposes and for winning the game, the production was there and the rushing upside is amazing. So do you see a world where Jaxson Dart could potentially start to climb these ranks and in future weeks be in the kind of B tier?
Well, absolutely, because this game against the Saints is much friendlier for him than the Chargers. And we saw what he did last week. What was it? 10 rush attempts, including the touchdown, kind of a mix of scrambles and designed runs to the point like quarterback draw for the touchdown was a really nice run. But the Saints defense, you know, they've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. They've allowed the 5th most through rushing production. Their rushing defense ranks 29th in yards allowed. And both of these teams play fast. So if we've got 2 teams who are playing fast, the Saints rank 2nd in plays per game, the Giants rank 10th, then that just opens up potential. I don't think either defense is particularly going to stop the other. I don't think we're going to necessarily see particularly high quality quarterback play from one side or the other. And missing Malik Neighbors is massive for Jaxson Dart, but I think that there's enough there. And obviously we've seen Andrew Thomas back out there at left tackle. He allowed 0 QB pressures, no sacks, hits, or hurries in both this game last week and the one before that, which gives you a little bit more faith that Jaxson Dart is going to have at least some time to dial some things up. And look, the rushing production is all we're kind of looking for at this stage in a quarterback. I mean, you're pretty much talking 2 QB territory, or if you're missing Lamar Jackson, Brock Purdy. I mentioned it on the waivers video this week that he's the kind of guy that I'm okay plugging and playing. But when we get through to beyond this week, that's when the question marks come in. And is he going to be somebody that we're able to start? Because after this game, they play the Eagles. Now, I'll skip that one.
I think, look, I was quite vocal in the offseason that I wasn't a huge Jaxson Dart believer. And I think that the Giants would have been better sitting in for the whole year because I think he needs time to develop. But I'll hold my hands up. If he's going to rush this much, it's going to allow him that time to develop, because the problem we see with rookies that get thrown to the fire too quickly is that if they start to struggle and they start to spiral from the pocket, it has real long-lasting effects on their ability to operate from the pocket, ability to deal with pressure. I think we're seeing that slightly down in Houston at the moment.
Yep.
But if Jaxson Dart is going to scramble and is going to be used in creative ways like this, it's going to allow him time to develop. And yeah, for him long term, he needs to start operating from the pocket, work through some progression reads, and run a real NFL offense. But for the time being, I'm fine with him running a joke offense. I'm fine with him scrambling around. And for fantasy production, it's going to be amazing. You know, if he's going to run 10 times a game, he's probably going to end up as a QB1. Let's be honest. It's where he's going to go.
Yeah, and it's kind of worth reiterating that, you know, at least in the guys that he does have, he has outlets. You know, after Malik Neighbors went down, Ryan Heath for fantasy points put out this data, but the target share that he distributed was 30% to Theo Johnson, 30% to Wandale Robinson. Those guys nice and near to the line of scrimmage, those guys where it's going to be quick passes more often than not. Darius Slayton further downfield at 15%, and then Cam Scatterbo at 15%. Maybe we'd like to see that a little bit higher, but on the whole, I'm very comfortable with him. I think just moving on just across this tier slightly, got to talk Bryce Young, because I know you mentioned him in your Dynasty video this week as a sell, and we've kind of a turbulent journey with Bryce Young, but this week feels like the week to hold him for one more week, because he plays the Miami Dolphins, who can't stop anyone and allow the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. What's worrying you so much that you're selling him immediately rather than holding for one more?
I think he's going to get a bench sooner rather than later, if I'm being brutally honest. And I think that he could be done as a starting NFL quarterback. I think that he's, you know, the flashes he showed second half of last year were him getting out of the pocket, being creative, being that, you know, Alabama quarterback that we saw creating out structure. That's disappeared. And he's got trigger happy and itchy feet and is unable to just sit in the pocket and process, and doesn't have that creative stuff out of structure. So I'm concerned that it's over for him as an NFL starting quarterback, quite frankly. So yeah, maybe he can do it against a woeful Miami defense, but if they're at the half and they're struggling, would we be shocked if we saw him pulled and Andy Dalton then back into that lineup? I wouldn't. And I'm sorry, but at this point in his career, I think if he gets benched, I don't think he's going to have another life again. And you know, unless maybe Andy Dalton's involved in another car accident or something. But I think that could be it. So that's why I'm calling him a sell, because I'm worried that the NFL fantasy relevant, well, not even fantasy relevant, the NFL career could be over. And at that point, you aren't getting anything for him in trade market.
Fair. All fair. I'd hold one more.
Moving into the E tier, we've got Spencer Rattler, Tua, and then the aforementioned CJ Stroud, who, wow, quarterback 23 on the week when we've got 4 quarterbacks on bye feels incredible, but wow, how the mighty have fallen. Do you hold out any hope in CJ Stroud at the moment?
Well, I do, and I've kind of gone back and forth on this one a little bit since we put our rankings together, because CJ Stroud gets to play the Ravens, and there is no better medicine for anyone right now than playing the Ravens defense, which is just all kinds of miserable, and now looks set to be without Marlon Humphrey, cornerback, who hasn't played particularly well this year. And then you've potentially got Nate Wiggins, the 2024 first round cornerback that they took. And then we're also dealing with Chidobe Awuzie, who's potentially going to miss this week. Then you've got Roquan Smith, who is almost certainly going to miss this week. You've got injuries along the defensive line, which is still stacking up. So if CJ Stroud can't put in a fantasy performance against this Ravens team that has allowed the third most QB fantasy points, ranks dead last even in points per game allowed, it would be mind-blowing. But at the same time, we haven't really seen anything from CJ Stroud lately to make me feel like there's any faith to be had in him.
Yeah, my one thing I'm holding out hope for is that we get to see more Jayden Higgins. We get to see some more routes over the middle of the field, which is just an area the Texans aren't operating in at all. And hopefully we get some more in-breaking routes to Nico Collins. That would be something nice to see.
Well, the Ravens have allowed the league-high QB rating to slot passes along with 5 touchdowns there, so maybe it's another Christian Kirk week.
Beautiful. Love that. Very happy with that. The final tier round out, it's the guys you should not be touching in any world. Carson Wentz, Jake Browning, Cam Ward, Cooper Rush, and then Dylan Gabriel. Any interest, any dart throws in anyone in this, or are you just too much of a sicko if you're looking to start any of these guys?
I mean, it's just misery down here, isn't it? I understand it with the bye weeks, but these probably are going to creep into the guys that you have to start in some Superflex contests. I would say that, Carson Wentz is probably okay against this Browns defense simply because of the weapons that he's got, but he's not particularly alluring. Jake Browning, everything seems to, the shine has fallen away from him. Detroit, maybe if it gets out of hand, the passing volume is okay enough. Cam Ward against Arizona. Arizona's defense is quite difficult. I think it'll give him a hard time on the road. I don't know. I feel like there's a little glimmers with Cam Ward every week, but not quite enough where I'd be confident yet. Cooper Rush played plenty of games, but he's just, it's just dull. I'd rather see Tyler Huntley start for the Ravens if Lamar can't go. As of Wednesday, John Harbaugh saying that Lamar could be out there. It seems like there's enough stuff coming from the team that they would like Lamar to play this week if possible. But it seems more likely than not that he'll miss this one. And then Dylan Gabriel, on your first ever start, before you've even had a chance to practice with the team, you were flying from America all the way over to London. You were playing against Brian Flores' defense and the Vikings, who've acclimated over here for the last week. I just do not believe that is a good recipe. And I think that they should have thrown Joe Flacco into the fire for one more week.
Yeah, fire up the Vikings DST wherever you can. And that is it. If you're struggling for any of those start-sit decisions, ensure you check out our other positional rankings videos and get those questions in the comments below, and we'll help you nail those start-sit decisions.